Hello everybody. After much technical difficulty, I will be bringing you your guide to speedrunning in the level 5 category of Jacksmith today. Just as a disclaimer, this kind of category and this game is very RNG dependent, so if that's not your thing, be cautious of this category. So, as an overview, for the level 5 speedrun category in this game, you have to get to level 5, and to do that, you have to defeat all of the enemies on your first 3 days of combat, and then on the 4th day, you have to defeat 3 of the enemies. Time ends whenever combat finishes on the 4th day. So that means if you defeat the final enemy, or all of your weapons break. In general, you do not want your weapons breaking in the first 3 days. So you want to make sure you're making some pretty decent weapons for the first 3 days to make sure you can get through combat quickly, because combat is RNG dependent. When you're hammering your swords, you want to go from left to right like this. The game allows you to hammer much faster if you go from left to right rather than right to left for some reason. Now, one of the biggest parts of this game is that you have to guess what kind of weapons you're going to have to make each day. So that makes things a bit complicated. And you want to be making the best weapons you can. So don't make crooked swords like I did here. But yeah, whenever you're planning out your day, you just have to guess what kind of weapons you're going to have to make. So that is part of the RNG. Now, what you're going to want from combat is, instead of getting these emeralds, you're going to want to get the ores that the enemies can drop. And this is another RNG dependent thing. You can get luck attachments for your weapons that will help you get better ores, so that can help, but still some RNG there. Alright, so after day 1, moving into day 2, we will unlock the bow, which means now we have to start guessing what kind of weapons we'll need to make. We will always have to make at least one bow on the day that we unlock bows, and we'll also have to make one axe on the 4th day at minimum. So you're going to want to use your good ores on days 2 and 3 to get through combat as quickly as you can. On day 4 we have a different strategy, but I'll discuss that when we get there. Now you will have time to pour out a sword and hammer it before you go back and pour the bow that you made out of copper on day 2. So that is a bit of a time save there, just to make sure you're always doing something. You're going to want to pull the right arm over to that stain where I just indicated, and then pull the left arm as far out as you can, and that will give you almost, if not 100%, on the stretching score for the bow, just about every time. As far as I'm aware, there's no shortcut for dropping the attachments onto the swords and such. That's just something you'll have to get a feel for. So here you can see that I did guess wrong on what I'd have to make, so I lose some time there just from guessing incorrectly. Whenever you're pulling down your melted ore, there's a somewhat inconsistent shortcut that I'll discuss on the next day as to when you can start pulling down as hard as you can. There's a point where once the ring is about lined up with the crucible that you're pouring into, you can just pull the rest of the way down. It'll spill a little bit, but it won't be enough to make the weapon crooked, so it'll still give you 100%. An important thing to note is that the Flash player in browsers will be shut down at the end of this year, so if you want to speedrun this after this year, you're going to have to download a Flash player in this game, which you can find both of in the Discord for speedrunning this game. So I'll leave a link in the description for that. So now we're moving on to day 3, and day day 3 unlocks the shop and the cannonball. And the cannonball is something you use during combat. The shop is something that you will have to open up and exit out of on day 3 whenever you unlock it. It's just required, so be ready for that. He pops up in that window there in the middle. So I accidentally liked their Facebook page, so that's some time lost, but it did give me 100 gems. So I decided to just buy an attachment for my sword. Since I knew I didn't have a grip for any of the swords, I figured I would just pick one up while I was there. So here we're doing so right there you can pull down as far as you want, as hard as you want, and it should still give you 100% on the boring. So there we use the stain again for stretching. And we go ahead and throw on all of our attachments for our bow. And we did get 100% on the stretching. So there I noticed that I don't have another arrowhead or fletching. So since I do have to make another bow, which is unlucky, and I don't have any good ores, I go ahead and go to the shop since I did like the Facebook page and pick up another fletching for the bow to help get me through the day faster. And I think that was a smart decision on my part since I did accidentally click on the liking a Facebook page. So it turned out that buying the grip wasn't useful for me on this day, which did suck. Getting 3 of the same weapon is pretty bad because you lose all of your attachments. You don't really have any. So now that we have the cannonball unlocked, we're just going to go ahead and use that basically as soon as it's available every time. There are occasions when if you use it right after the enemy dies, it'll just hit the ground instead of hitting the next enemy. So if the enemy did just die, you might want to wait about a second or two and then use the cannonball. It's basically always safe to use it after your troops have pumped their fist though. So now we actually get to move into day 4, which has a different strategy than the other 3 days. So your main goal on day 4 combat is to get through 3 enemies and then have your weapons break. So what we're going to do is make every weapon today out of copper. And as long as the weapons are still well made, this will basically ensure that we get to the 3rd enemy, beat them, and then our weapons will break soon after. Now this is assuming that you use some good attachments, but you have to avoid using any attachment that increases the stamina of your weapon. Otherwise, the weapons will last too long. Now, it is okay if you let some weapons melt and heat up a little bit too long. It won't affect your score too much. I went ahead and poured them all out here, but you don't necessarily have to. So yeah, we use an elemental buff, which doesn't really matter since all of the enemies are neutral. But we used a attachment that boosted our power, but not our stamina, so that's okay to use. Here we have no bow attachments because the last day we had 3 bows, so that also hurts our time pretty bad. So we're still going to want to use the cannonball basically on cooldown. You will clear through the first 2 enemies pretty quick, but the 3rd enemy takes a while to get through on this day, so don't let your durability deceive you on the first 2 enemies. You should still need the cannonball, unless you had really good attachments, or you used stamina boosting, which is a problem. So yeah, you can see even with using the cannonball on cooldown, 2 of my weapons broke on the 3rd enemy right at the end. So it would have been better if the axe also broke, like killing the 3rd enemy. That would have saved the time of him walking over. But yeah, that's my guide on speedrunning up to level 5. A lot of this will just be muscle memory and getting a bit lucky. and I'll make sure to update if any glitches are found, but so far there aren't any of those. So thank you all for watching. See you next time.